Okay. Whoa. I just disconnected my mic. Good afternoon. Thank you all for... I disconnected the swivel arm, actually. Good afternoon. Thank you all for tuning in today. I'm happy to be back with you for another episode of the Lloyd Show. Glad to have everybody here. I'm glad to be here. I'm a little bit more casual today than normal. Normally I wear a jacket, but I didn't want to put a jacket on. I didn't want to put a jacket on today, so I don't have any other excuse but that. So anyway, glad to be back with you today. The title of today's show is Our Faults and Why We're Here, or How They Got Us Here. This was actually a tough show to title. Maybe because I don't know if it's because of well, it's just like the topic of the show isn't exactly flashy. It's not like it's not sensational or anything like that. And then what we're talking about exactly is not sensational either. I think that it'll be interesting, and I think that it'll actually be a pretty good show. However, sorry, I wanted to make sure that everything was going through correctly on OBS. We were transmitting. Anyway, so today is about understanding why we're here. So, in looking around at the world and looking around at the situation that we're in, the moral situation, the political situation, it's very common for people to wonder how it's possible that we got here. How did otherwise sensible people allow themselves to be led into the position that we all are in now? How were they convinced? How was the wool pulled over their eyes? Is this what they wanted? Was there something wrong with us from the start? Was there some infectious, was there some like parasitic ideology that implanted itself into everyone's brain and forced us to do this? Is it simply chance? And so people will look at different things. They'll look at individuals. They'll look at the thinkers of the 1960s and the 1970s, maybe even the 2000s, depending on who you're focused on, whether it be the neoconservatives or the progressive liberals of the sexual and progressive revolution. And they'll look at them and they'll try to figure out the influence that they had, and they'll look at them and try to develop it maybe in a lineage, like an academic lineage of their thought from back to someone else a few hundred years ago, to see what it was exactly that, when it began, and what this thing is that eventually pushed us into the position that we're in now. Some people believe that the American founding, the American people are flawed from the start, and so they'll attempt to adopt they'll attempt to like shun the American character totally in favor of another one, whether it be some foreign like pan-Europeanism or some other specific European ethnic identity that they possess, or a religious identity which is either theirs or one that is foreign to them which they have adopted. And they'll try to claim that this is just the way that it is for Americans, and so we have to reject whatever it is that they define as Americanism in order for us to escape the path that we're on. Many people like to look at leftist writings. Maybe they will read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. Oftentimes the argument there is number one, so that we can understand the way that the left operates, so that we can see what they're doing when they're doing it, point it out and identify it. Whether or not that's effective is a different story. I'd ask you to think about how many times somebody has pointed out the left behaving in a certain way, saying that it's, identifying their actions as nefarious and subversive, and how often that has resulted in the masses being shocked and saying, I had no idea. I'm so glad this was pointed out to me. Now I'll change my life. I'll change my behavior, or, I won't listen to these people anymore. You probably don't find very many examples of that. Oftentimes they'll say that they're reading things like this so that they can understand how the left operates, how they've been successful at infesting our institutions, how they've taken them over, and they'll say that they're studying these things so that they can learn how they did these things so that they can emulate it. And again, I would ask you to think about however many times you can imagine that that's actually happened, that that's actually worked, that somebody has emulated leftist tactics and methods in order to overtake an institution or even make progress towards overtaking an institution. But ultimately, the question is whether or not reading these sorts of things can help us understand the position that we're in. Many people will look to Karl Marx, they'll look to the Bolshevik Revolution, they'll study Horkheimer or any of the cultural Marxists of the Frankfurt School, because they want to understand what they believe to be the ideology that brought us to the position that we are in now. And now I've encouraged people not to do this in the past, but for different reasons. There's nothing wrong with understanding these people, but simply understanding an ideology, understanding a theory or a belief or some other thesis, and the end that the author or the creator would like to accomplish through this prescription or what they believe about the world as stated in this theory. This doesn't necessarily mean that it will take root in any given culture or in any person's mind. You have probably had you've probably heard about communism, you've either read about it or you've had somebody tell you about it. Maybe you've just seen people talking about it online, but it didn't infect your mind, likely. Now, maybe you're like a reformed communist or something like that, but it didn't infect your mind. And if it did, and you're watching this and agreeing with me now, or you're a conservative now, then obviously it didn't mean that this was terminal, that it meant that anybody who believes these things, who adopts this worldview, will inevitably end up in a certain position. It's possible that it can be rejected. And so if it's possible that a theory or an ideology can be rejected, when people adopt it for some rational reason, if they believe that it has something to do with their self-interest or whatever, then if they see that it's going in a direction which they did not anticipate, then they can say, this isn't what I signed up for, and they can hop off the ride. Now, you would probably, the objection would be that you say, okay, well, so if they adopted this, whether it be communism or any of the things that are like associated with that today, like critical race theory, the gender ideology stuff, and of course the roots of all of these things, including Marxist communism, go far deeper than just Marx. So if they adopted this and like basically in that situation, then it would have to mean that they wanted to go down this path. And so you can't actually glean that much. You can't glean that much understanding from simply understanding the thinkers who wrote these things or the ideologies themselves. You can't learn that much just from understanding them. You have to learn about the motives of the people who adopt these things. You have to understand the character of the people who adopt these things to understand why it is that they adopt them, why it is that they believe them, why they think that these things might further their self-interest. You have to understand the character of these people, the way that they see themselves, because those two things determine what they believe their purpose to be in the world. As I talked about on the stream yesterday, or excuse me, 2 days ago, which is now put on private, primarily because the first half of it I wasn't happy with. This is by no means something that I have come up with myself. It's not something that I've developed on my own, but I think it's a topic which is very powerful and deserves a better presentation than what I was able to give it yesterday. And so I decided to private that, and I'll make a video or a stream on it again in the future. However, the idea is about the idea of human perfection, like the telos of mankind, the telos of government, the end of government, which is to facilitate human perfection in the subjects of the king or whoever. Basically, the idea is that those with power, those closest to power, those with influence, have a responsibility to use it to push others towards perfection, because we all are meant to be moving towards perfection. However, you can't understand what human perfection is unless you understand what humans are. And of course, the subject that I was talking about last time was in the most extreme examples being being like the gender ideology stuff. If you don't even understand man and woman, then you can't understand your telos. If you don't understand nations, if you don't understand the American identity, then you can't understand who the American people are and to what end we should be directing ourselves, or Christians, etc. This applies to everything. If you don't understand what something is, then you cannot understand the telos to which it is naturally oriented. And then it is understanding that telos, it is understanding that end that we should desire. And that is what tells us what we should be doing. If we don't know what perfection is for us or for a thing, then we can't understand what we should be doing to get there. And similarly, when you have an understanding of who you are or what something is, then you can understand why they do certain things. You can understand steps that they take, maybe because in any of these things, whether it's a person or a nation or a culture, you can't always perfectly understand yourself or these things. And so it's possible to misunderstand yourself. It's possible to believe things about yourself which are not true. And it's possible, and thereby you may and therefore you make decisions which are not actually in your best interest. This could be you can apply this again to the gender stuff, to the American nation. If you believe things about America that are not true, then you will do things which do not benefit the actual historic American nation. And so what's important when you're trying to understand how America got to where it is now, you have to understand what America was from the beginning and throughout time. Now, we can look around us now and we can perhaps observe these things. It's harder now when there's far less, when there's much less social cohesion, when there is less of a coherent identity shared by everybody in the country, because not everybody even considers themselves to belong to the American nation, not even to consider that how many people actually do belong to the American nation. But so if you believe that America is something other than that, if you believe that it's an economic union, for example, then you'll make decisions which are different than the decisions of a person who believes America to be a nation which shares blood and history and religion, etc. And so there's a couple different examples that I want to use today to kind of give a frame for the points that I want to make. So I want to reference a couple different things from de Tocqueville and from Nietzsche. I'm not it's not really about them, and so I'm not talking about Nietzschean philosophy or anything like that. I'm not going into depth into Democracy in America by de Tocqueville, but rather certain observations that they made, so that we can use that, because these were, they were contemporaries to different, they were both part of the 19th century. I'm not sure when de Tocqueville died, but he lived earlier than Nietzsche did. And so anyway, but the Nietzschean points that I want to make are less about America and more about mankind post-Enlightenment in general. This is what he talked about, and so that's the relevant stuff. But the Alexis de Tocqueville stuff is about America, and then we'll zoom out and look at mankind as a whole, like the Western man at large. So if you don't know, I'll give you a background. You probably have heard of Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Again, I'm not giving a full explanation of what that is, because it's not really the point of the video. But France had just had their revolution, and so basically they sent de Tocqueville to America to look at the American government, to look at the American people, to assess whether it was something unique about Americans that allowed them to have this form of government, or whether it was something which could be transplanted to France or to anywhere else in the world. Basically, was democracy or representative government something which was possible anywhere, or was it just some unique quality or character possessed by the American people that lended itself to this form of government. And so he came to America and he spoke to common people, to everyday citizens, and he learned their way of life. He listened to what they liked. I mean, mundane things about, like, he made observations about what they like to read, the types of literature they like to read. They prefer, like he says, they prefer to read magazines more than books, fiction more than nonfiction. And so the way that they like to dress, the way that they behave around one another. And he, of course, assesses the American government as well. He meets American officials, dignitaries. I believe he even meets the president. I'm not sure, but I believe he meets the American president at the time. And he spends a number of months in America making these notes. And then he goes back to France and he compiles this work, which is about the American government and then like about the American people. And it's titled, together, these two volumes are titled Democracy in America. And so, as I said, he makes like a number of different observations and makes predictions about America, actually, and says that, now I haven't read the whole thing, but apparently he predicts that we'll begin naming our generations because there is a disconnect from one generation to another. We identify more with each other rather than like the generations of our own family that came before us. Because in Europe, in the old hierarchy of the old world, your profession and your lifestyle would, generally speaking, be determined by the profession and the lifestyle of your father and his father and so on. And so, given that in America that's not the case, you have more choice over what your life is, there's more competition for different things, that we would become disconnected from our fathers and their fathers and so on. And so, like, these are the types of predictions he made. Many of them are very prescient. And so, but there are a number of things that he says about America which, regardless of any predictions made, which are generally fairly accurate, but regardless of any predictions made, they give us some insight into who America is. And if you have the understanding, if you have ears to hear, if you know about what's going on and what's been happening over the past 100 years, like the radical changes that have been happening, you can understand how it was possible that such a thing could take root and grow in America. And so when we think about early America, you have the freedom to do so much. You can go west, you can start a life for yourself there, you can change your profession from one thing to another. One thing that he notes is that there's no, like, you can't really tell from somebody's manner of speaking or their dress who they are and where they belong in society, because there isn't this hierarchy that exists in Europe in the same way. There aren't noble families. There aren't like official government like positions of nobility. And so you aren't addressing people by these social, like, cultural titles. And so everyone refers to each other as sir, I believe that he says. He says that a man addresses his server at a bar or a restaurant as sir, which is, of course, likely not the case, which has not been the case. That type of mutual respect paid to people is not the case throughout most of history. And so he says that Americans, that he can think of no place less free on earth than America. And now, of course, like, our conception of it, regardless, maybe even if you know what early America was like, you tend to think that early America was very free, and it was, because you had the ability to do anything you wanted within, like, your own capabilities. You could just go out and, throughout the 19th century, you could go west and get free land, basically. You could choose to live your life however you wanted. There was freedom of religion. You did have a constitutionally protected right to free speech. But he says that there is no place less free in America, or no place less free in the world than America. And he says it's because our bodies are free, but our minds are enslaved. And so what he talks about is basically, like, you can't be punished here for breaking social convention. You can't be punished here for making the wrong person mad, like officially punished by somebody with the authority to do that. You can't be caned in in the square for bumping into the wrong person or calling somebody a name who had a higher station than you. But given the nature of America and our government, the semi-democratic form of government that we have, majority opinion like matters a great deal. There's something freeing when your opinion doesn't have like a direct effect on the government of your society. And so the way that Americans police social change, or excuse me, police like social opinions and political disagreements, and this is what he said, the word that he uses is shunning. Americans will shun people who disagree with the majority on certain things. Now, if you're like, depending on if you're listening to somebody like lecture about this, a lot of the time they'll talk about like this is how opinions like or things like segregation or remain accepted in society is because people are shunned for speaking out against the majority. Now, of course, if you look at the present day, there are different things that people get shunned for. So should we always say, anyway. But people get shunned for having the wrong opinions. Today we call it something else. Now, ostracization is not a new thing. This goes back probably as far back as human community goes. This kicking somebody out of a community if they are deemed unable to or if they can't conduct themselves, if they can't play nice with others, basically, then you kick them out and you don't let them come back. But he says that Americans will shun each other for having political opinions which do not conform to the majority. And so nowadays, this is used to destroy people for having the wrong political opinions. It's used to destroy the lives of people who have the wrong opinions about controversial topics like human biodiversity. It's used to shun people who have religious opinions which don't jive with the prevailing social winds of the day, like homosexual marriage and these sorts of things. If you don't believe in that, if you don't believe in a woman's quote, right to abortion, then you are shunned, you're ostracized, you're canceled, as people say now. And so what we see now, the ostracization that we see now, is not anything new. The difference is the direction, like the end to which it is being used. The people who are in charge of it, like the people that make up the majority. Because in the past, America has been more homogenous, not just ethnically, but more like in the past, you would all believe that we all are created equal. You would believe these things which maybe like, especially for the generations in the 20th century, things which were more like mythical. They weren't really real. It wasn't necessarily part of the American founding, and if it was, such as like e pluribus unum, they had an incorrect understanding of it. And these are just broad, like big examples, like non-controversial examples. But e pluribus unum, out of many one, and so you were able to accept like certain, like some immigration and stuff because of that, because like this was something that everybody agreed upon, out of many one. Now, of course, out of many one was not about that. That's just like I would say kind of a flimsy example, but hopefully it communicates something to you. So the majority opinion was at least that America was good. Maybe it had flaws, but it was good. The majority opinion was that Christianity, or at least Christian morality, are good and that they govern American society, that our Constitution and our founding documents were based on those things. And if you weren't a part of this, or if you didn't agree with this stuff, then you think about the way that atheists think that they were treated in the past, and it does sound like, okay, you're not allowed to participate in the discussion if you don't believe in God or something like that. And honestly, this happens in any society. Like in any society, there are accepted boundaries on speech and religious belief, etc. The problem though is that when you live in a society like America, you think that those boundaries don't exist, but they do. You have this illusion of freedom. You have an illusion of liberty to discuss what you want to discuss, to say what you want to say, liberty to have religious belief. You have an illusion of religious liberty. Religious liberty made a whole lot more sense. Like, we did believe that we all had religious liberty at a time where we all practiced the same religion with slight differences. Christianity, regardless of the denomination, is Christianity. And it was allowable to have certain fringe groups, like you could allow Mormons to practice to some degree, even though they're not technically Christian, not actually Christian. You could allow some Jewish or Muslim or maybe small amounts of other pagan religions like Hinduism or something to a certain degree. Now people weren't happy about it, and they would there was still a boundary to society. It's like, you have to agree with this, but you weren't going to destroy them. But now the majority opinion has shifted, and it's shifted very heavily, very quickly. And so the point of this is that this is nothing new. The lack of freedom is nothing new. It was just that our ideals have shifted. What we believe has shifted. It's shifted from something good, and good things naturally are more tolerant. Not tolerant of evil, but good things naturally are more, I would say there's more grace to it. And so it's shifted to something bad now, and so it's more oppressive. Anyway, the point is not to go too far into that, because there's more from de Tocqueville. He also said that if given the choice between liberty and equality, Americans would choose equality and slavery over liberty. Americans were, according to him, obsessed with the idea of equality. Now, at the time, in colonial America, in antebellum America, and even up to the 1900s, equality meant something very different than it does today. Equality doesn't mean that we believe that we're all the same, literally the same, men and women are not different. Equality didn't mean we should all be doing the same thing, we should all be living the same, we should all have the same things and do the same kind of stuff and live the same lifestyle. We should all be capable of it. But equality was, you know the difference between equality now and equality then. You know the old lines: equality of opportunity is not equality of outcome. But Americans desired equality. They wanted equality above all else. And as he said, Americans would choose equality with slavery over, slavery, it equals all of us being equal slaves rather than liberty. And what we see now is that that's exactly what we've done. It's a warped view of equality. It's a misunderstanding of what equality ever has been, certainly what it was to our founders. But we have chosen equality, or what we believe to be equality, over liberty at every turn. At every turn we've made that decision over the past however many years. You no longer have freedom of association in this country. You can't be friends with who you want to be friends with. You can't live where you want to live. You can't hire the people that you want to hire. You are compelled to say certain things about certain people. You're compelled not to say certain things about other people. And this is not even to mention, so there are already the social consequences of saying certain things about certain groups, or believing certain things about the world. There are already these social consequences of ostracization and your life being destroyed. And now it's institutionalized. Now the government has a part in this. If you don't hire the right number of a certain kind of person, then you can go to jail, you can be fined. If you have religious beliefs that conflict with the law on hiring practices or educational practices, anything like this, then the government will withhold funds from you or jail you or shut your business down, etc. And this is only the tip of the iceberg with let's just say the CRA regime and the fetters that it has placed on our freedom in the name of so-called equality. And so our desire to push people out of society, push people out of the social discourse when they disagree with the majority is not new. Our desire for equality of one kind or another over even liberty is not new. But these things have been warped and twisted for evil ends, basically, for nefarious purposes. Equality sounds good to our founders. It would have sounded good. If we lived back then, it probably would have sounded good, unless you were of a certain political mind. But at the very least, you can understand it, and it can sound like a noble idea, even if you disagree with it. The equality of the founding can sound like a noble idea. We're all citizens. We're all equal citizens, equally treated under the law. But this idea of equality has been warped to mean that the government picks winners and losers, that the government has to hold some people down and raise others up so that we can be at the same level. It's like that. I can't remember the name of the book. But it's like a dystopian story where, in order to make people equal, in order to counteract like genetic advantages that some people have, like strong people have to walk around with weights in their shoes. Smart people like get electrocuted whenever they think about things. And this is kind of the world that we live in. And so we've lost the freedom to make our own decisions, to associate with who we want to in the name of equality. And now the question of like what exactly happened and who did the warping, who did the misleading, who infiltrated and all of that, these are different questions. But again, in order to understand how these things took root, you have to understand why they did. Who were the people that accepted these ideas? Why could they accept them? It wasn't out of the blue. It wasn't in a vacuum that so-called cultural Marxism or so-called critical race theory, which are really just hatred of the founding stock of the nation and Europeans as a whole, and and a hatred of the traditional beliefs about like society, like all of this stuff together, like these subversive beliefs. How did they take root in a society like America? Why did they not take root in other societies? Why did Marxism take root in the Soviet Union versus not taking root in America? There's a reason that these things happen. It's because of who the people are, number one. But furthermore, it's like what's happening in the world. What situation are the people in at the time of this happening? And you can't actually understand any of this. You can't understand why we did these things, why we accepted these bad things, how it took root here, unless you understand who we are. But once you understand who we are, then you can understand why it was able to animate us in the way that it did, how it's been able to take over such a great number of people. And when you understand that, then you can begin to think about how we can fix it. How can we change it? Now, the problem is that we don't have control over the government or any other institutions. We can't just censor these beliefs outright. Even if we did have control of the government, we can't censor the beliefs. And this is another thing. In order to understand how to fix it, you also have to understand the people. In another scenario, if you were in China, you can just censor things because that's like culturally they don't have any belief about like anti-censorship. Maybe they don't like it when when the things that they like are getting censored, but they don't have any beliefs about why censorship is morally wrong or why it's imprudent or anything like that. The people are less likely to revolt over these things, more likely to revolt over other things. So in the same way that you have to understand the people, the nation, the culture, in order to understand how these problems began, how we got to this place, you also have to understand who we are and what we are in order to begin looking for the solution. Now, the idea of the Nietzschean philosophy that I'm referencing now is that without meaning, people have to create their own meaning. whether it's people individually creating their own meaning, society creating a meaning for them, individuals, their own personal religious beliefs, but outside of a world where we believe that there is like a natural order of things, people do have to create their own meaning, because otherwise you can't. I mean, there is no reason to live. You cannot motivate yourself to do anything if there's not a purpose for it. And so if you're personally religious, then that's fine. You probably don't have this problem in the same way. This like modernity, Enlightenment stuff probably has like seeped into you and affected you in some way or another. But you may not have this to the same degree, especially if you've like deeply internalized your religion. But other people do. And so they internalize things like anti-racism. They internalize their political like pet theory, whether it's Marxism or fascism or like Catholic integralism, any of these things. Progressivism, they internalize like the morality of the Western internationalist order. Why do people have such an emotional response to anything about the war in Ukraine? It's because they've internalized this world order as something which is innately good. It's like this is the eternal battle. This is the expression of the eternal battle between good and evil, if there was one for them, because they don't have a God. They don't have a God. They don't have a religion to teach, to tell them what this is. Because even religious people, many religious people don't actually they don't see the world in a religious way. Maybe they believe in a God. Maybe they earnestly follow the commandments of the Bible. Maybe they really are Christians, but they may not see the world through the Christian worldview, because there is a Christian worldview. Even across like traditions, even across Christian traditions, there are certain things about Christianity which are universal for all people who are Orthodox Christians. Little o Orthodox, of course. And so people have no direction. They have to create something for themselves. And of course, there's an idea that like some people can live without any purpose and they can do their own thing, but most people can't handle it. And so they can't create their own purpose. And so they need somebody to do it. And of course, this is the concept of like the overman. I'm not sure if saying the thing. I don't know. There are like associations with this stuff, but like he has this concept of the Ubermensch, the overman. And basically the belief is that there will be larger than life figures who will give meaning to people. They'll be good speakers, they'll be powerful leaders, they'll be charismatic and seductive, and they will provide a new meaning to these people. And this can happen through, basically it's like a master and a slave dynamic. This is kind of something that he talks about. Again, I'm not here to like describe the philosophy, and so I'm kind of blending these things, but you have like a master and a slave dynamic. Of course, slavery outside of the American context. And so whether this is somebody who is leading as a figurehead, or these are people who are behind the scenes leading, you need people to create a worldview or to create or deliver a purpose to people, to give them some kind of meaning for their lives. And so what has happened in America is that religion has waned. Again, even if people have genuinely held religious beliefs, the religious worldview has faltered in America. The religious worldview has faded. People don't see things through a religious lens anymore. They don't see things. They have accepted the lies about morality and freedom of morality. Hopefully that makes sense. And so conservatives have like accepted this, whereas like the left, the progressives, the whoever, whatever you want to call them, in many cases they don't have a name because it's not one group. There's many groups that have been in control at one point or another and projected a worldview for people to follow, or a purpose for people to follow, and these groups are at odds with each other and they're just all making the wrong decision. And when you follow a ton of different people who are all making the wrong decision, you end up in a really bad place. And that's basically the story of what we are now. But we've forfeited the responsibility of powerful men, of great men, of influential men, of ambitious men, to influence the world in a good direction, because we have accepted the myth of individual discernment of purpose. We have accepted the myth that people are the way that they are, and that you just have to like vote to make things right. It's anyway, I'm getting off track here. And so we have allowed other people to do this for us, because they believe, they truly believe, the people who are doing this, whether it's like Obama or whoever, who have come into a position of authority, whether public or private, a position of authority and influence, and have given a purpose to the masses. These people believe that it is their responsibility to do this, because they don't believe that the world has a natural order in the way that Christians do, in the way that the ancients would have. Of course, religious differences aside, there is a natural order, there is a natural law, there is like a telos of things. And so, divorced from that, leftists, atheists, nihilists, whoever, do earnestly believe that the masses like should be guided into the direction of like what they believe to be right, whether it's progressivism or whatever. And conservatives have not internalized this. Conservatives have not accepted this, because we believe that there is a natural order, and we think that it's self-evident. And so we don't have any desire to influence people, because, well, it should just be self-evident. You should just go around pointing it out to people. And then, like, if you can just point out the obviousness, if you can just point out the hypocrisy of the left, if you can just point it out, then people will come to their senses and they'll say, oh, I missed that. I don't know how I missed that. Anyway, I totally get what you're saying. You're right. But that's not how the world works. That's not how the world works. And so we forfeited government and leadership to lesser people. And now, because we live in this world where there is no unifying purpose, there is no unifying national spirit, where there's a rejection of traditional morality, of objective morality, where there's a rejection of even objective truth, we are not, as Christians, conservatives, right-wingers, nationalists, whatever the label is that you fall under, whatever category you fall into, we are not to accept that that is true and therefore try to lead with like creating a new purpose and a new end. And this is like, I think that this is the mistake of like reactionary European movements of the last century, is that it was like embracing this in a way, because it's not as if any of them were just like, oh yeah, nothing is real, nothing matters. They believed that other things were real, but they come onto the scene and they're like, we have to go for something new. It is like reactionary in a sense, but it's still progressive. Now, unless you're talking about like Franco, who comes to power and then before he dies, like puts the king back on the throne. This is a different thing. But I'm talking about a certain other like reactionary movement in the last century. There's still something progressive about it. There's something that is assuming that there is no order and that order like must be created. So, but our job is like to understand the way that the world works, the nature and the character of the people who we want to help and who we want to lead, and then but articulating to them a compelling worldview and leading them back to the natural order. Whether or not we can change the world back to the natural order, it's not as if we could ever go back to the old world, but we can at least like bring back in the minds of certain people, i.e. our community, our nation, whatever, you can influence these people back to something else, which is transcendent. Because the problem with the problem with like individuals leading, or like individuals creating movements who lead people or something, is that it will always fail. Anything created by man, no matter how strong and powerful it becomes, always will fail. It always will deteriorate, because we cannot create eternally in the way that God can create. We are created in the image of God insofar as, or in so much as we can create to a certain degree. We can be creative. We can make. We can bring order out of chaos. However, we cannot bring like supreme order out of chaos. We cannot eternally order things. We can only do so much, because we are imperfect, and so that any structure we create, any order that we create, will also be imperfect. And this is why we have to understand like who we are as a people, understanding the American character, not identifying certain flaws within it and thus rejecting it as if those flaws like inevitably led to the place that we're in now, or as if there is any worldview or any character, any national character which is free from flaws, but understanding who we are, who we were, seeing the flaws and fixing them. And through our efforts, because the world is the way that it is, you can never just like, you can never vote enough to end like, you can never vote enough to bring back what was lost. The meaning that the world has, like, and it's not that the world has lost meaning. The meaning of everything is eternal and it is unchanging as God has made it. But the perception that people have of the world and its purpose and their purpose has changed. And so what has to be done is we have to lead people, not so that we can make something new or so that we can continue leading them forever or set up some new like kingdom or some new hereditary monarchy or empire where we're just going to lead them in this new like conservative worldview. But we have to lead them back to the old ways. I'm trying to think of other words to say it. It's like it's very hard for me to articulate, but I think that I've said everything that I can say. I think that you understand. And so this is something that has been done with every social change and with every political revolution, every social revolution for that matter, social and political revolution. You destroy the old order because it either no longer serves you, or it's become corrupt or dangerous or evil. You destroy the old order, perhaps even with mechanisms of the old order, and you destroy it and you return to chaos, and out of chaos you institute a different order. And so the order, we're not trying to create anything new, but rather reopen people's eyes, illuminate people to what simply is and how things simply are. Because in the same way, when you understand particulars, when you understand who you are as an individual and what you are, you understand your purpose. When you understand the nation, who you are as an American, as part of this American nation and what you are, then you understand where we've been, why we've done that, where we're heading, what our purpose should be, what we should be working for. When you understand humanity, when you understand the nature and the reality of human nature, then you can understand why we are this way, and you can understand the end for which we have created, the purpose of humanity. And when you understand what reality is, what all of this is and why it is this way, then you can understand the purpose of everything. And that is, it's about God. It's all about God. When you understand the purpose, like the purpose and nature of reality, then you understand something about God. Of course, we can never know everything about God. But when you understand why things are this way, where we're going, what is the purpose of all of this, Life has to have a purpose, and it does have a purpose. We cannot create a purpose, but in leading people, we have to point people towards the purpose that simply is, which is to glorify God. That is the purpose of all creation. That is our purpose. And if you believe that your purpose as an individual and your purpose as a member of like mankind in general, when you understand that your purpose is to glorify God, you know how to behave. And when everybody understands that, if everybody understands that, whoever understands that, then they can know how to behave. And you don't have to teach them. You don't have to indoctrinate them. When people understand the purpose that God has given us, when people understand God's law, when they understand the person of Jesus Christ and the incarnation, you don't have to indoctrinate them. You don't have to trick them and convince them and push them into anything. And so with so many things, it's about understanding. You can only understand the world if you know what it is. You can only understand your nation if you know what it is. And you can only understand yourself if you know who you are. Anyway, that's enough rambling. I got a little bit off track, but I think I said everything that I wanted to say for today. We'll go ahead and see what the live chat is saying. See if there are any super chats. If you want, I meant to shout it out earlier, but we have, if you want to super chat, the best way to do it is entropystream.live/Jake Lloyd. Your support is not required, but it is appreciated. Thank you to Patrick Casey on DLive. He donated a diamond. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks, WD-40 Glock. I got a haircut yesterday, actually. Thank you. Thanks for noticing. Let's see. Go to YouTube. Whoops. On entropy, thank you very much for... actually, I'm not going to read that. Thanks for the $3, but I'm not reading that. It's that would get me banned on YouTube, and I don't care for that. But also, if that's how you think, if you're hearing what I'm saying, you can't see that it's about more than that individual group, then there's not really much that I can do for you. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that it was edifying for you in some way. I will be back tomorrow. Be sure to subscribe to the DLive channel also, or the YouTube channel, depending on which one you're watching. Be sure to subscribe to both in the event that I lose one. My Twitter, you can find me on just under Jake Lloyd on Twitter. And big news, I'm very excited for tomorrow's show. I will be joined by the Prudentialist, somebody whose content maybe you're familiar with. I hope so. Hopefully after tomorrow, if you're not familiar with him already, you'll go watch. But he makes great content, very intelligent guy, and I'm looking forward to having him on the channel. So be sure to tune in tomorrow. That show will air at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I think that'll be great. Personally, I'm looking forward to it a great deal. I'm really looking forward to that discussion. So also be sure to like the video, subscribe if you want. We still have people dislike rating the channel just because they don't like that I'm not friends with their anyway. But so yeah, thanks for watching again. Be sure to tune in tomorrow 6 p.m. Central Standard Time for a discussion with the Prudentialist. We will be discussing identity in the age of the internet, in the age of social media. You'll see the title tomorrow, but that's the basics of what we'll be discussing. So, whoops, gotta get my transition set over here. All right, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your evening. God bless. didn't see that Patrick sent other things. I don't know if he's still watching, but I didn't want to just ignore him. It says, good show, particularly the part about shaming. So true. Don't you, as a victim of that, it hits particularly hard. Anyway, Patrick, thank you for the 2 other diamonds, and thank you to Monty as well for a diamond, and maybe Corbin Ransley too, it looks like. Anyway, I always come back. You always have to wait. It's kind of like an after credits scene for a movie. Sometimes you sit up, or you sit in a movie theater for a while afterwards, anticipating an after credits scene, and it's kind of like that. You have to like wait to see if the stream is going to end or if I'm going to come back to shout somebody out for something. So anyway, thank y'all. I'm not going to do an outro again, but good to see y'all. Again, I'll see you tomorrow. Mm-hmm.